They sold you a game. They gave you a license. And when the license expires, the game dies. Forever. The Protect Our Games Act just died in the California State Senate. For yes votes. 3 no votes. The rest abstained. The Entertainment Software Association, the lobbying arm of Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Take-Two, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, showed up and killed it. They told senators that requiring a 60-day shutdown notice was impossible. That offline patches were impossible. That private Minecraft servers would become illegal under the bill's language. They lied. And they won. This is not a story about video game policy details or technical loopholes. It is a story about power. About whether you own what you pay for. About whether corporations can sell you something, call it a sale in the storefront, then delete it from your hard drive whenever quarterly earnings demand it. The failure of AB 2928 exposes a fault line in the digital economy. The law still treats many digital purchases as if they were physical objects shipped in cardboard boxes, while publishers treat them as revocable access passes that can be pulled at any moment without compensation and without meaningful legal remedy. The Protect Our Games Act, Assembly Bill 2928, authored by Assemblymember Chris Ward, was the first legislative attempt in the United States to enshrine basic consumer protections for digital games distributed through modern storefronts. The bill was modest by design. It did not ban always online DRM. It did not require offline modes at launch. It did not interfere with subscription or live service pricing structures. It asked for 3 things: 60 days of written notice before a game's official public servers shut down, a clear public list of which features would stop working after that date, and the provision that terrified the industry, either a patch enabling offline play for whatever remains functional, or a full refund of the original purchase price to the original buyer. 60 days of notice. An offline patch or your money back. That is it. That is the bill the Entertainment Software Association killed. Let us be precise about what the ESA is. The Entertainment Software Association is not a neutral trade association mediating between companies and the public. It is the political arm of the video game oligopoly. Its membership roster reads like a who's who of the industry's ruling class: Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Take-Two Interactive, Microsoft and its Xbox division, Sony Interactive Entertainment, Nintendo of America, Epic Games, Warner Brothers Games, Bandai Namco, Capcom, Square Enix, Sega, Konami. These companies collectively control the vast majority of the global games market. They carry combined market capitalization in the hundreds of billions of dollars. They maintain lobbying budgets in the tens of millions each election cycle. And they deployed that concentrated financial power to kill a bill that asked for 60 days of notice and a refund option for ordinary players. The ESA's opposition letter to the California Senate Committee on Judiciary is a masterclass in corporate doublespeak crafted for maximum legislative cover. They claimed the bill would create significant legal and technical challenges for studios of every size. They argued that many games rely on third-party licensed content, music recordings, automobile brands, voice acting talent, middleware, that cannot simply be stripped out for an offline version. They warned that the bill's language could inadvertently criminalize private server communities like those keeping Minecraft servers or classic World of Warcraft servers alive. Let us unpack each argument. First, the technical impossibility of offline patches. This claim collapses under minimal scrutiny. We know it is false because publishers have done it before. When Electronic Arts shut down The Simpsons Tapped Out, they released a final update allowing players to access their towns offline. When Ubisoft prepared to shut down the Cruise servers, we will return to that. They could have patched the single-player campaign to work without an internet connection. They chose not to. The technology exists. The will does not. Because an offline patch means players keep playing without paying again. It means the product they bought remains a product they own. And that violates the fundamental logic of the games as a service model. Players must never own the product. They must only rent access to it for as long as the publisher decides to keep the servers on. Second, the third-party licensing excuse. This is the industry's favorite shield, and also its most revealing. Music licenses expire. Car manufacturer licenses include term clauses tied to specific publication windows. Voice actor contracts were negotiated for a live service with ongoing content drops, not for a perpetual offline copy bundled at full price. Middleware licenses may cover deployment on company-operated servers rather than local client copies licensed for offline use. The industry claims this web of contracts makes offline patches legally impossible in many cases. But this is a decision, not an absolute constraint. When publishers negotiate licenses for always online games, they structure those licenses for the service model, perpetual renewal, ongoing revenue sharing, annual audits. They could negotiate for perpetual offline rights. They choose not to because it costs more upfront to secure those rights, and it undermines the recurring revenue model. The licensing excuse is a business decision dressed up as a legal necessity, repeated often enough that legislators mistake it for legal reality. Third, the private server fearmongering. This is deliberate misdirection designed to split the gaming community against itself. The ESA knows full well that private server communities operate in a legal gray area that has little to do with consumer protection legislation targeted at official server shutdowns by the original publishers. The Protect Our Games Act addressed publishers terminating their own services, not fans running unauthorized infrastructure based on leaked or extracted server files. But by conflating the two, the ESA mobilized a segment of the gaming community against their own rights. This is classic divide and conquer. Make enthusiasts fear that consumer protection will hurt their hobby, so they fight against their own interests and help defeat the bill. Now let us talk about The Crew. Because The Crew is why this bill exists at all. The Crew launched in 2014. An open-world racing massively multiplayer online game built around persistent player progression across a condensed United States map. Ubisoft sold it as a game you buy and keep. $60 at launch on consoles and PC. Millions of copies sold worldwide. Players spent years building car collections, progressing through the campaign, forming crews with friends, and exploring a persistent map that was updated monthly with new challenges and content. Then, in December 2023, Ubisoft announced the servers would shut down on March 31st, 2024. Not just multiplayer matchmaking. Everything. The single-player campaign that shipped with the game. The cars that players had patiently unlocked through hours of play. The progress they had earned over nearly a decade. All of it gone. No offline mode. No refund path. No compensation of any kind. You pay for the game. Ubisoft deleted it legally and ethically without recourse. This is not an edge case. This is the model. The Crew 2 launched in 2018. The Crew Motorfest launched in 2023. 3 full-priced games in the same franchise targeting overlapping audiences. The first is already dead and unplayable as anything other than a reminder of loss. The second and third will follow the same trajectory within their commercial lifespans. This is planned obsolescence packaged as a modern service. You do not buy games anymore in the traditional sense. You lease them until the landlord decides the existing building is more valuable as a parking lot for the next tenants. The Stop Killing Games movement formed in direct response to the Crew shutdown. Started by a YouTuber named Ross Scott, the campaign organized a petition to the European Commission that gathered over 300,000 signatures in a matter of weeks. It pushed for a European Citizens Initiative. It attracted the attention of French consumer group UFCK Choicer, which filed a lawsuit against Ubisoft in March 2024 alleging misleading commercial practices and breach of consumer obligations in the digital marketplace. The European Commission responded by opening a formal dialogue with game companies about standardized end-of-life practices for digital products. That is progress, slow, bureaucratic, and easily stalled by industry lobbying if organizers lose focus, but progress all the same. It shows that the legislative and legal terrain is not entirely closed when pressure is applied from outside the United States. Then came California. Assemblymember Chris Ward introduced the Protect Our Games Act in February 2024. The bill passed the California State Assembly with a unanimous vote, 73-0, a rare display of cross-party agreement on consumer protection in a polarized era. It moved to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And there, inside a closed committee room with minimal press coverage, the ESA killed it. The committee voting record tells the real story. 4 yes votes, 3 no votes. The rest abstained. In the California Senate, abstention functions as an effective no. A bill needs a majority of the full committee just to advance. Who abstained? The records show Democrats and Republicans both. This is not a left-right failure with a partisan solution. It is class interest in action. The entertainment industry is a major donor to California politicians at every level of government. The ESA and its member companies spend millions on lobbying contracts and campaign contributions in Sacramento every election cycle. When the industry calls, the committee listens, and many members decided silence was safer than confrontation. But here is what the ESA's victory actually reveals beyond the usual corruption story. They did not merely kill a bill in committee. They exposed the class logic of the digital economy in public view. The video game industry has spent 15 years migrating from product to service. From cartridges you own outright and can resell to discs you license under end-user agreements to digital downloads you effectively rent to subscription streaming where you have no permanent local copy at all. Every transition removes ownership further from the buyer. Every transition increases recurring revenue streams for publishers and platform holders. Every transition concentrates power in the publisher and centralizes control over whether the product even runs next month. The player becomes a subscriber to their own entertainment rather than an owner of it. This is rentier capitalism in its purest form, and video games are one of the clearest examples in modern markets. The publisher holds the means of play, the authentication servers, the account infrastructure, the licensed content integrations, the executable code. The player pays for temporary access on terms set entirely by the other party. The publisher can revoke that access at any time, for any reason, with no compensation owed and no effective legal remedy for ordinary consumers. The player holds no equity in the software, no enforceable property right, no ownership interest that survives a server shutdown. They are tenants in a digital building owned by a landlord who holds the keys, the electricity, and the lease terms. And the state, the institution that exists in theory to balance power between unequal parties, sided completely with the landlord. The California Senate did not simply fail to protect consumers from fraud or deception. It actively protected the industry's right to dispossess them without consequence. 4 yes votes, 3 no votes. The rest silent. That silence is the sound of class solidarity among the political donor class in Sacramento, and it should be treated as the political liability it is. The Stop Killing Games movement understands this frame better than many mainstream consumer rights groups, because it was forged directly in the pain of the Crew's shutdown. Their statement after the vote did not blame ordinary voters. They did not blame gamers for not caring enough. They named the ESA by name. They named the lobbying apparatus. They named the abstentions as what they are, complicity with corporate power. And they announced the next phase with clarity, more bills and more states. Federal lobbying in Washington. Dedicated funding streams. Professional organization with staff who understand legislative procedure. They are building class consciousness for digital consumers, and they are unlearning the naive belief that petitions alone change policy. The European Commission's dialogue with publishers is the same story on a different stage with different rules. Dialogue is not regulation. Dialogue is what power concedes when it wants to avoid real regulation while pretending to act. The European Union has the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, and the GDPR on the books. It has enforcement tools and market leverage over platforms that operate inside its internal market. It chooses dialogue, in part because the industry lobbies Brussels just as effectively as it lobbies Sacramento, if not more so, and because multilateral regulation is slower and weaker than unilateral pressure from national consumer groups with real legal standing. UFCK Quasir's lawsuit against Ubisoft is different from either legislative or dialogue approaches because it runs in the courts rather than in the legislature or the executive suite. A legal challenge forces disclosure of facts under oath. It creates binding precedent in a European court. It can impose real financial penalties that change the underlying math for publishers. It is the terrain where consumers can actually win, if the courts have not already been captured by the same donor class that dominates legislatures. The more lawsuits like this succeed, the more publishers will calculate that offline patches and refunds are cheaper than litigation and regulatory backlash combined. But here is the reality the industry does not want gamblers or gamers to understand. The technology for consumer protection already exists. Offline patches are technically trivial for most games when publishers actually commit engineering resources to them. 60-day shutdown notices are administratively simple. Steam and console platforms already send emails about upcoming service changes. Refund systems exist at scale. Steam, Epic, and console stores already process millions of returns annually. The infrastructure is there. The customer service systems are there. The only thing missing is the legal requirement to deploy them as a consumer baseline rather than as a discretionary courtesy. The Protect Our Games Act did not fail because it was impossible to implement. It failed because it was possible. Because if California proves you can require offline patches and refunds without destroying the economics of game development, other states will copy the law within months. If one state requires disclosure of shutdown dates, the federal government might follow. If consumers realize they have enforceable rights in court, they might demand more of them. The slippery slope the industry fears in private briefings is not regulatory burden. It is class consciousness spreading like a contagion among people who thought they were just buying entertainment. A citizenry that recognizes it has been dispossessed, that recognizes the transaction labeled by is actually a revocable license controlled entirely by the other party, is a citizenry that can organize to rewrite the rules of the marketplace. Every dead game is a lesson. The Crew, Anthem, Babylon's Fall, Crossfire X, Rumbleverse, Knockout City, Lawbreakers, Battleborn, Paragon, Artifact, Crucible, Hyperscape. The list grows every quarterly earnings report. Each one marketed as a one-time purchase. Each one killed as a service as soon as engagement metrics decline. Each one teaching players the same lesson at scale. You own nothing. You rent everything. The landlord decides when the lease ends, and you have no legal standing to contest it. The Protect Our Games Act was a modest demand. 60 days of warning. An offline patch or refund. That is not revolution. That is basic consumer protection that buyers in physical retail markets receive as a matter of course. The fact that even this modest, common-sense demand was crushed by corporate lobbying in a California legislature controlled by the party that claims to represent working people tells you everything about the structural balance of power in the digital economy. The industry publicly says games are art. Games are culture. Games are a creative medium deserving of long-term respect and preservation. Then privately, through its lobbyists and attorneys, it treats them like disposable commodities. Delete the art when the subscription lapses. Burn the culture when the quarterly report demands it. Wipe the servers clean to drive players into the next quarterly live service release. You cannot have it both ways. Either games are cultural artifacts worthy of preservation across generations, or they are extractive revenue streams designed for amortization schedules and investor returns. The ESA's lobbying chose extraction. The artists who created these worlds did not choose that. Their players did not choose that. The Stop Killing Games movement chose preservation. They chose consumer rights. They chose the radical idea that when you pay for something in a transaction labeled a purchase, it is yours. This bill died. The movement did not. They are organizing in more states right now.